Welcome to the Selling to Corporate podcast, where we're going to be challenging your sales beliefs around selling to corporate organizations and help you increase your bottom line profits every single month. I am Jessica Lorimer, your sales expert and guide in this world of selling to corporate companies, skyrocketing your company sales and making the impact that you really want in the world. Now, don't forget, if you do enjoy the show today, please do head over to iTunes and leave us a review. But enjoy this episode, and I am really looking forward to sharing some epic sales wisdom with you. Okay, for those of you out there who are parents, you are officially heroes and you're making it through your first school holiday of the year. And if you are not parents like me, you're probably enjoying some, hopefully, well-earned time off. I don't know about anyone else, but I spent the first quarter of this year finishing some incredible corporate projects that I've been working on with companies. I have been designing, delivering, onboarding salespeople around the world for large organizations. And I've obviously been working with my amazing entrepreneurial clients as well. So it has been a really busy start. And I am very, very, very much looking forward to a couple of well-deserved weeks off. So if you, like me, are enjoying some downtime over the Easter period, then please know that I am absolutely raising a glass of something alcoholic, non-alcoholic, warm, cold, whatever the weather and situation provides to you wherever you are in the world. And I'm coming to you with a little bit of a different episode today because I was thinking about how we've all had, a bit more of a relaxed start into 2025. I think that 2024 threw up lots of challenges for people. We saw the world change in very, very different ways. And we've talked about this a lot on the podcast, the fact that most of us are starting just that little bit slower this year. And so even though I have been spending all of my time, all of my working time at least, developing, designing, delivering all of these amazing trainings for both the companies that I work with and for the entrepreneurs that I work with as well, I've also been taking a fair amount of time to do things that are quite unusual for me. I have cut my working week down significantly by a day and a half a week, which is something that I never thought I would be able to do because I'm obsessive about work. And also because, when you start a business, it's kind of weird to think about the fact that you do have your own schedule, but also the sense of freedom comes with having a stable sales pipeline. And for the first sort of few years of your business, that's always it feels kind of difficult to relax and let go. And so I was pondering it over the first quarter of the year and haven't quite had time to sit down and do what I would call a State of the Union episode. And I thought that now would be a really, really good time for me to, take some minutes out and really think about what information you need to be making decisions about your business this year and the way that the world is operating and how that might impact your coaching, consulting, training, speaking, or done-for-you service business when selling to corporates, but also just in terms of how business has changed for small business owners over the last year and what trends we're seeing that are going to last and how we might want to change our approaches. Now, this is a slightly different episode from normal. It's, like I say, what I would call a State of the Union type episode that's more focused on trends and insights that I'm seeing and that you'll want to incorporate into your strategy for the rest of 2025. It is not your typical, this is how to do cold email or this is how to do this. So hopefully this episode will give you a little bit of inspiration and a little bit of motivation to think during some of this downtime that I really hope that you're getting about where you want your business to go and what kind of business you want to be building this year, because it has been different. So today's episode is kind of twofold in terms of audienceship, I suppose. It's for those of you who already have a corporate revenue stream, who have been selling to corporates, and by that we mean any organization that is not privately owned, i.e. by a solopreneur like myself or like yourself. And it's for those of you also who are yet to make that jump and who want to or are exploring getting a corporate revenue stream. And so I'm going to break this episode down into those two categories so that you can just get a little bit of a, sense check on where your business might be going, what you want out of 2025, and whether you might need to readjust some of the plans that you had made based on some of the world decisions that are happening. So let's do a quick recap. Now, I've been running a service-based consulting business for 11 years. That makes me a relative dinosaur in terms of running my own business because, as we know, over 90% fail in the first 2 years. It also makes me a relative dinosaur in what I would call the online entrepreneurship space. And by that, my definition is the space that we operate in primarily in virtual roles. So people who are primarily using virtual methods to engage and deliver with clients, whether that's you being an online coach, a consultant, a trainer, a speaker, or a done-for-you service provider, doesn't really matter. But if you are primarily using an online platform, so you are using LinkedIn or blogging or SEO or YouTube or podcasting or whatever else it is, and hanging out in Facebook groups and doing whatever you need to do, then I've been in that space for a very long time. And I am one of the, as my friend Dan puts it, one of the OGs in the space. And I'm also one of the people who wash my hands of the kind of pyramid online space. Must be 2019, so almost 6 years to the day. And so I think it gives me an interesting overview of where the markets go. And the reason behind me thinking that my opinion is interesting here is not just because I've been in the space a very long time, but because I've been in the sales world for a very long time. I've been in the sales world for over 18 years. I've seen recessive environments. I've seen economic booms. I've seen very, very significant economy changing downturns. And through every single environment, one thing has remained constant for me, and that is that I've always successfully sold. And I think that that's really important to mention here. And you know me, usually I don't get all pretentious and talk about my experience and how great I am, but this is super relevant because there are a lot of people right now talking a lot of big game who maybe don't have the same common sense around what's about to happen and around what is happening and has been happening for the last, I would say, 5 years, but other people might challenge that opinion. And I think it's really important because a lot of people, particularly those who've grown in that online, I would say primarily coaching space, have never run businesses in recessive environments. And if they did run businesses during economic downturns, they haven't been salespeople through those recessive environments and ongoing downturns. And that means that whilst they might have the best of intentions around some of the advice that they give and the insights and things that they predict, they might not be correct. And so I want you, because I'm conscious that I'm saying this and giving you this advice, to sense check everything that you're hearing. So use your brains diligently. You know, I'm very, very fortunate in this space. I create communities of incredibly intelligent people. And whilst that makes you guys amazing at research and going out and getting qualifications and certifications and thinking about things, it also means that you find one of my best skills, sales, really, really difficult. And in economically challenging environments, that can become even more difficult for people who are less confident. So this episode is not to say, believe everything I say as read because you're intelligent people. You can go out, do your own research, figure it out for yourselves. But it is to say that I'm going to share some of the insights that I have around the way that the market is moving. I'm going to break that down into what's going to happen in the B2C space, that selling directly to consumer space, what's going to happen in the B2B, the business to business space, and most importantly, what you need to do about all of that and how you want to tie it all together. Okay, so it's, I would say, quite an important episode. I don't know at the start of this how long it will be, but I'm going to make probably 7 very clear points that you will need to think about how you want to put them into your strategy at the end of the episode. Okay. Now, what I would say just before I jump in and start giving you all of my, I would say epic insights of wisdom, but that sounds a little bit braggy. I will say, if you know other coaches, consultants, speakers, trainers, and done-for-you service providers, please do me a favor. And if you think this episode, or indeed any episodes of the Selling to Corporate podcast, are any good, please forward it to them. Send them the link and say, hey, you should listen to this because we're in a different time than we were before. And I think that this person knows their stuff. Because whilst I can sit and spread the word on my own, I am but one person, and we all know how much I hate social media. So my promotion strategies are low. But if you do know people that you think this episode would benefit, or any other episodes of the Selling to Corporate podcast, please do pass them on. Do me a favor and help me spread the word, because it has never been so important. And with that, let's start talking about what we're seeing. So let's start on the same page. I've talked about this a lot on the podcast, and I'm not going to go into it in massive detail again, but 2024 was a crap fest for a lot of people. It felt like it was the hangover year from the pandemic. It felt like 2021 and 2022 had kind of barreled through. Everyone was getting back very gung-ho about moving forward with their goals and taking action and doing the things. And then 2024 came along and everyone felt flat and tired, and things got hard for a lot of people. Personally, I had quite a few family issues in 2024 that really needed my time and attention, and in perhaps a more mentally strenuous way than they had in previous years. And so I wanted to focus my time where it was most valuable. We don't start businesses to avoid our families and ignore them and not spend time with them. We start businesses to be flexible, to have freedom. And for me, that meant being able to have a business that really supported time, quality time with people that I value, And that wasn't an uncommon theme in 2024 from anyone. I had so many people in my communities who were talking about big, big topics that had happened to them in 2024. Loss, bereavement, grief, mental trauma from things that they had experienced in 2020 and just kind of bottled up and now needed to process. There was just a lot happening for people. And so we headed into 2025, and suddenly we combined all of that weird 2024 energy with the practical changes that were being made politically around the world. In the UK, we had a change of government. We had an incredibly challenging autumn budget that, well, you can hear from my voice, I don't agree with quite a lot of those decisions, but we are where we are. And then, of course, the US had elections, and that didn't necessarily go as the world expected. And the new president of the United States has made some commercial decisions around things like tariffs that have been challenging for the globe. Add that to wherever you are in the world, and it's quite likely that your country also has been in the midst of major elections or political changes. It's quite likely that your economy has been uncertain and that people have been panicking. So we've walked into 2025 and the media has cooked up this firestorm where everything is awful. And to be clear, I'm not the world's biggest fan of some of the things that the media say, but I also appreciate their commitment and duty to reporting. And I also appreciate, as a consumer of the media, my commitment and diligence to fact finding and deciding what my opinions and beliefs are. And so really, when we look at this episode as a whole and some of the trends and insights and advice that I'm giving as a result, that's to say this is how I've interpreted data, clear data that I found that is not just this was on the news. In fact, I've gone and found quite a few reports. And if you're interested in any of them, please let me know. I'll always send you links to things that you might want to have an extra read of. Okay. But based on all of the uncertainty that we're seeing around the globe, you might think that this episode would be me saying, buckle up your britches, things are about to get tough. That's such an old school phrase, isn't it? I'm so sorry if you listen to this podcast and you're under 30 because I'm just not cool anymore. And it's actually not. It is going to contain a few warnings and perhaps challenge some perceptions. And I think that actually that is much more likely for those of you who are currently running primarily business to consumer businesses or who are trying to run both B2C and B2B businesses, because it is going to be tougher trying to do that. Okay. And the reason that it's going to be tougher is one, if you're selling primarily B2C, so business to consumer, the cost of living crisis has hit individuals. There is no getting away from that. I'm going to be talking about that further and what that means for you in terms of sales and where you might want to direct your attention. In terms of those of you who are trying to sell both B2C and B2B, the reason that that's going to be tougher is because you are having to dilute your sales activity. You are having to split yourself to create launch strategies for one and stable pipeline sales activities for the other. And as we all know, none of us are able to multitask. That is a big lie. Nobody's brain can do it. I know that the fashion was that women could, but I'm not Superwoman. I can't. I doubt anyone else can. Scientifically, it's been proven that we can't. What we can do is context switch relatively quickly. But if we're under other strain and stresses, that becomes much harder for our brains to do. And so if you are trying to run both a B2C and B2B business, and you don't already have solid sales strategies for both elements of that business, it's going to be really tough because you are up against economically challenging conditions for a B2C side of your business, and you are not going to be spending necessarily the right time, energy, or prioritizing the right activities for B2B. And so it will become harder. It's not to say don't do it. I do it, so I'm not going to be a hypocrite and say you can't possibly. But during this episode, we need to talk about some things and where you might be spending your time sensibly this year so that you can survive and thrive in 2026 and beyond. Okay, so let's start with business to consumer, because I think it's helpful, especially during an economically challenging time, to understand what actually happens to individuals who are being sold to. Now, even if you don't have a business to consumer side to your business, this is important for you to understand because 9 times out of 10, the companies that you are selling to are also selling to individuals. Okay. So if you are trying to work with major sports brands, then you will be working with organizations who sell a lot to consumers, not everything. And, very, very much not their main driver of revenue, but they do have a B2C arm. If you're trying to sell to retailers, you are selling to organizations who are trying to sell directly to consumers. So it won't necessarily impact you or your pricing or your offers, but it is something that you need to be aware of so that when you're having commercial conversations with organizations and stakeholders within them, you can understand where they're coming from. Okay, so let's talk about that business to consumer market. Well, speaking as somebody who has been to the supermarket relatively regularly in the last 6 months, I can tell you that with my own eyes, I have seen the prices rise. And I am not the only one. In fact, if you look at the media, you can see that the UK especially is seeing very, very high cost of living at the moment. We're seeing food prices rise. We're seeing petrol, or as you guys in the US would say, gas prices rise. We're seeing mortgage hikes. We're seeing people paying more for utilities. These are all things that people cannot live without. Okay, so if you are like me, I operate in a family of 2 and 1 relatively expensive dog, um, then you're probably like our household. We have 2 cars. One of them is electric. One of them is powered by petrol. We have a property. We just had an offer accepted on a house. Yay. But also, if you're like me and you've been self-employed for a bazillion years, then you'll know just how much paperwork we're now doing for mortgages, and how much evidence I have to supply for everything. You are probably visiting the supermarket and seeing the cost of basics go up because, the supply chain around the world has changed drastically with humanitarian crises, war, and lots of other things that impact it. All is in that to say that people are being exposed to higher prices. And do you know what that means? It means less disposable income. And I just want you to think about that for a second, because I think that for the last 11 years, certainly that I've been running a business online, I have seen big money claims all of the time. I've seen people talk about 6 figures in 6 minutes. I've seen people talk about having, huge £1 million launches. And I am super excited and proud and pleased for those people. I genuinely am. I would never, ever take that away from anybody. My concern, however, is that that's not what we're going to see this year. It's also not what we're going to see for the average person selling to consumers this year. And that's based on fact. Okay, so I went and spoke at the Big Festoon recently. One of the statistics that I mentioned there was the fact that if you are selling to consumers directly, then the average percentage of your audience that will buy is 1 to 2%. 1 to 2%. That means for every 1,000 people that you have in your audience, 20 will buy, maximum. Now that is crazy to me because B2B has a much, much higher sales rate. Even for somebody who has no sales training whatsoever, they will close 25% of opportunities. Okay? So it's very, very stark difference. And what happens as a result when we head into these economically challenging and uncertain times is that everybody migrates to selling to individuals because they feel more comfortable there, right? And because it's what seems to be the popular narrative. Let's all go and sell to individuals. That'll be easier. They'll make decisions quicker. And nobody thinks about the practicalities of that. Now, 11 years ago, when I started my business, I built it to a really successful point with things like automation and funnels. And at one point, I had 27 working funnels in my business. And, that was hard work. It required a lot of technology. It cost me over £15,000 a month to run on the front end. And that was because in order to create that audience, you have to spend a lot on front end costs. And you're not just competing with, Maggie down the road, who is writing a bunch of Facebook posts that are really popular and she's getting lots of organic engagement. You are competing with everybody else who is taking out Facebook ads. You are competing with everybody else who's doing any other kind of paid traffic. And you are also competing with companies who are also paying for traffic to attract consumers. Can you see where the problem is? So if everyone is bombarding individual consumers with lots and lots of different things, guess what happens? People get confused. People don't buy. So we start to see that B2C cycle of revenue where people are, joining courses, selling to other people in the course because they're getting to know them and whatever. We see that sort of cycle drop. And it drops considerably. We also see things like engagement drop. We see things like people jumping on trends more often. So I think one of the next big things, if I was to predict anything, would be everyone's going to start selling like custom GPTs because they're relatively low effort to create. They're going to be relatively low ticket to sell. And people will think, we can create a funnel. We'll sell them into this small ticket offer. Then we'll upsell them into something else and upsell them into something else and and that's how they'll replace revenue. Fine, cool. No issue with that. I don't care, to be clear, what anyone sells or what anyone's doing, as long as they're happy, they're making money, and they're being ethical about it. That's it for me. However, For most people that come to me who are exploring developing a corporate revenue stream, I hear the same myths time and again. Corporates aren't buying right now. Not true. In fact, in 2025, corporates are predicted to spend £15.7 billion on external consultants in the UK alone. So that's not true. Corporates are very much buying right now. I also hear people saying to me, but I've heard that it takes longer to sell to corporates. Boom, not true. My clients are selling to corporates going from cold lead to close sale in 90 days. In fact, any deal under 100k, you should be doing in less than 90 days. Any deal over 100k, you're looking at 120. Okay, so not true that it's taking forever to sell to corporates. It's the kind of common narratives that we hear that corporates don't care about insert areas. So they'll say corporates don't care about DEI anymore because the new president of the United States has said that he's not interested in it. Not true at all. In fact, organisations around the world are governed by other political policies, which, especially in the UK, are very much in line with law around equal opportunities and the Equalities Act, which means that DEI is still just as important and just as prioritised as it was before. However, and here's the kicker, right? You might be thinking, but Jess, if all of this is true, why isn't everyone selling to corporates and why is everyone saying all this kind of thing? Well, objectively, everyone isn't having this experience. Not everyone is selling to a corporate and going from cold lead to closed deal in 90 days. Not everybody is finding that corporates are prioritising their area of expertise. Not everybody is finding that it's much, much simpler because corporates have much, much more money to spend than individuals to sell to them. And the reason that they're not having that experience is not because the data isn't there to suggest that actually it would be simple to sell to corporates, that it would make them more money, that it would help tide them over during what is going to be an economically challenging period. It's because they don't have the sales skills required. They've never learnt them. They haven't prioritised them. They've never invested in their own sales learning and development in terms of time, money, or energy. Now, that sounds like a really harsh thing to say. And I appreciate that there will be some of you who listen to this episode and be like, well, obviously this is what you're going to say, Jess, you're biased. And I understand that. I also think it's a really naive perspective. Because in times like this, it's where we see true salespeople rise to the top. In fact, an old boss of mine in 2011, he said to me, it's interesting. Anyone can make money in a good market, but only great salespeople can make money in a difficult one. And they're the ones who go on to make the most money overall. And that's so painfully true. And what bothers me is that we live in this kind of online bubble sometimes where we tell each other things like an echo chamber that feel comfortable. We say, we just have to ride it out a couple of months. Nobody's buying right now. Everyone's having to put their prices down. Nobody's doing anything about this. Everyone's using AI and it's cool to use open source technology and blah, 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 blah. We get into these echo chambers and then we normalize the very, very problematic things that we're experiencing. And I don't want you to do that because I feel a sense of responsibility to you as people who are actively seeking out information about sales and B2B sales specifically so that you can make the best decision for you. Again, I'm not really tied into what that is because with all due respect, I don't run your business. And I know where I will be focusing my time, energy, and attention this year. I know where I'm going to be making the most money this year. And I'm not worried about the current economical challenges or the uncertainty that lies ahead because I've built a stable sales pipeline with companies. I'm already running on multiple 12-month retained projects with organizations. So my revenue this year is done, but yours might not be. And if it isn't, That's why this is so important. That's why looking objectively at your revenue streams this year and weighting them or adjusting them is going to be so important. Okay. So let's talk about some of the things that we'll see in that business to consumer market. What are the common things that are going to happen? Well, one, we're going to see lots of low ticket offers being sold. So we're going to see a revival or resurgence of that funnel market, sell someone a one-off thing and then upsell them into something else and then upsell them into a high ticket offer and whatever. So we'll see a resurgence of this funnel / automation kind of piece. And that in itself will bring along a lot of content creation, because most people won't have the upfront funds and or investments to make in things like paid traffic. I say quite openly to people, when I was running paid traffic, I was spending over £2,000 a month on a Facebook ads manager and upwards of that amount on advertising every month before we'd even made any money on that B2C market. So we will see a resurgence in that because people want to do it organically. They won't necessarily have that upfront investment. And we'll see lots and lots of people spend lots and lots of time on organic content creation on lots of platforms. We'll also see a resurgence of people moving away from their passion topic. So, I see a lot of people who are super passionate about things, for example, like fractional HR or operations or strategic development and change, or things like nutrition for performance or brain health or, menopause or whatever. And we see lots and lots of these people who've got these topics that they are really knowledgeable about, qualified in, super passionate about, who will take the advice of the online space and move to selling, making more money. So we'll see lots more baby business coaches and business strategists and whatever else titles come out. But essentially, they will move or pivot from their original role in leadership or menopause or nutrition or performance or operations or any other epic, qualified, exciting thing that they were doing. And they'll suddenly say, I'll teach people how to make more money. Because in this kind of economy, that's what people think sells. And so you will see lots and lots and lots of that messaging. You're also going to see more people talk about how selling to corporates doesn't work. The irony of me doing this episode and talking about some of the trends and insights that we might see from the B2C world is hitting me hard right now. But we'll see more people talk about how B2B revenue streams are pointless, how they take longer, how it's so much harder. And a lot of the people who talk about this will never have worked in a corporate environment. They will never have sold to corporate companies. They won't know what a corporate sales strategy looks like. And they will spend time and energy creating content that talks about how selling to corporates doesn't work. I can't comment on the validity of any of it. I can't comment on those people's experiences of selling to companies because I don't know. And maybe some of them have tried and it hasn't worked for them. And maybe they haven't been able to spend the 18 years that I've spent on developing corporate sales strategies and B2B sales strategies. And so maybe it hasn't worked. But what I will say is that everything can be sold in good markets and everything can be sold in bad markets. Okay? As long as you have sales skills and a clear sales strategy. So although I'm saying, hey, look, the B2C market is going to be harder over the next year because the individuals you're selling to genuinely will be making very difficult choices about where they spend disposable income, it doesn't mean that some people won't be selling to individuals. Some people make an absolute fortune. It just might not be you if that's not where your sales strategy is or sales skills are. Okay? It's the same on the B2B side. Okay, so you will hear more content from people who say that selling to companies is harder than ever. Companies don't have any money. Companies are cutting resources. All of these things are why you shouldn't be selling to companies. You should absolutely be selling to individuals. Just, take your own gut feel on it and look at the data and what the data suggests rather than the popular narrative, because it's very, very easy, like I say, to fall into the echo chamber of everyone's struggling, everything is hard. I just, can keep doing exactly what I'm doing and eventually it'll all pay off, instead of taking that step back and thinking, hang on a minute, is there, where's the clear evidence here? What's the real story that I'm telling myself? And what's the real actions or activities that are actually happening? Okay. And then finally, we'll see a lot of, I think, disillusioning practices in the B2C space. So things like intellectual property theft becomes really common in economically challenging environments. We'll see a lot of payment plans being defaulted on because when individuals are struggling financially, the first things that go are payment plans that they maybe thought they could make commitments on and now don't want to. As a result of that, we'll see lots and lots of legal activity because, we'll see a lot of cease and desist happen. We'll see a lot of people taking legal action or debt collection and all of those kinds of things. So whilst none of this sounds great, I can't stress to you enough, if you are selling to individuals, you have to be eyes wide open about that, and eyes wide open about the amount of work that you're going to need to do specifically in 2025 to run a B2C revenue stream. Okay. When it comes to the companies that you're trying to target, who may also be targeting consumers, it's actually kind of a different story, because most of the organizations that you would target, for example, if you're working with retailers, they are not necessarily selling £5,000 packages that they are expecting payment plans on from customers. Okay. You might see that if you're selling to retailers, they're selling, I don't know, shoes for £150, which is a one-off purchase, or, their customers will be able to pay via external services like Klarna or ClearPay or other pay apps that are then responsible for that payment. You will see that companies who are selling higher ticket items, so things like sofas, for example, or, mortgage companies or anything like that, they will already have clear payment plans in place, and they actually already will have a finance department that is designed to support customers going through hardship. All right. So those companies who are selling anything high ticket to consumers will already have plans in place, and they will already have the data around, in recessive or economically difficult environments, how many payments are we likely to see drop? And they already have risk departments and very, very experienced financial professionals who will predict these kind of things. And that company will have been gearing itself up to make it through these kinds of environments, which is why it's much easier for them as large organizations who've been through this kind of thing before to predict how they are going to survive and thrive through an economically uncertain environment rather than you or me. Okay, because they have the data, they have much bigger risk departments, they're very, very clever people whose only job it is to track that data and trends and predict, and, entire departments and funding that supports those customers going through hardship. So if you don't have those things, then you might want to consider how much weighting you put on a B2C stream this year. Okay. Not to say don't do it. It's not to say that I'm giving it up. It's to say that I'm going into this eyes wide open. These are the things that I've considered. I think they might be helpful to you. On the flip side of that, we have the B2B. So again, for those of you who are considering getting a B2B revenue stream, this is relevant to you in terms of understanding what you're walking into in the current environment. For those of you who are already selling B2B, this is about the insights and trends that you may want to consider so that you can figure out how you want to operate your sales strategy this year if you're finding that your current strategy is not paying off in the way that you expect. Okay, so we've seen some really interesting things. First of all, I think it's helpful always to come back to data. So when it comes to data, I mentioned this earlier, but UK companies specifically are poised for 5% growth in 2025, which means that their external consultancy spend is predicted to be £15.7 billion. Again, if you want links to any of the reports on this, please do drop me an email. I'm more than happy to hook you up with the links. Now, what was really interesting during my period of research for this episode was the fact that 58% of companies say that they are going to be using external consultants more in the next 12 months than they have previously. In fact, only 1% of companies said that they would use external consultants less. Now, why do we think that is? Because in a world where we have experienced vast amounts of change over the last 12 months, we're hearing in the media quite a lot of negatives. We're hearing that there are hiring freezes. We're hearing that redundancies are being made. We're hearing that whole departments are being cut. We're hearing that projects aren't going forward as they were before. There is lots of bad news if you look at BBC News on any given day about where companies are at. We're also, again, specifically in the UK, we've just had a budget, which means that companies are now paying national insurance contributions much, much more early on employees, which, again, media coverage of has been companies aren't going to want to do that. We're going to see more people getting laid off. We're going to see less working opportunities, etc., etc. So why does it make so much sense then that actually 58% of companies will use more external consultants than they did previously? And why is there going to be such a high consultancy spend in 2025? The answer, my friends, is quite simple. It's something I've been saying for a while, which is when companies have high periods of growth or the expansion. So if we look at the tech market, it's a really, really easy comparison. Tech companies over the last few years have rapidly expanded their teams and their permanent headcount so that they can be in the race for technological advancement in areas like AI and things, cybersecurity and things like that. A lot of those companies grew very, very quickly and didn't really think about the cost impact of that, of having lots and lots and lots of team members if they didn't hit upon the big thing, right? And so when we see economic downturn, we see lots of companies getting rid of permanent headcount because it is a fixed cost for them. So when they are looking at how do we reduce our fixed costs, permanent headcount is one of those things. Unfortunately, for the people getting made redundant, that sucks. And for external consultants, so for external, and by consultants, let's just be clear, I mean the whole gamut. So coaches, consultants, speakers, trainers, done for you service providers. I'm putting under that banner for brevity. For external consultants, it's a good thing because whilst permanent headcount has to be reduced to reduce that fixed cost, those projects still have to happen. Business critical things still need to go ahead. Companies still need operational support. So for done for you service providers like project managers or business analysts or fractional HR or anything like that, there's absolutely room for you. For consultants in other areas, so comms, marketing, health and wellness, there's a lot of room for you because it's not a fixed cost and it can make real impact and support peak performance of employees. And when you've got a reduced amount of employees, really, really important to keep them healthy, operating at their best, doing the right work. Again, for speakers, super, super important. Companies will use more speakers because they want to motivate and engage staff who remain. They want to reduce what we would call survivor guilt. And they want to make sure that people are inspired to be innovative, to be creative. And finally, for trainers, obviously, it's really, really important. Anybody inside the business still needs sufficient training so that they can do their job to the best possible standard. Okay, so for external suppliers, whilst the media will give a really, really rough ride on everything that's happening, this is actually a good thing. Okay, it means that if you have the sales skills and sales strategy, you are going to be able to win more business. However, it also means that as we see more reduction in permanent headcount, so redundancies, we're going to see more people come into the market as consultants, which if you haven't already got your sales strategy sorted, will be problematic for you because it means more competition. Okay. And to be clear, competition isn't a bad thing. I don't believe, in this whole saturated market majig because blue ocean markets are inherently more difficult. And one day I'll probably do an entire episode on why that is. But saturated markets are a good thing. It means there's market share that you can take. Okay. If you know how to sell, if you know how to use a sales strategy, if you know what you're doing when it comes to generating, converting, and closing leads into customers. If you don't, and you already have a problem with that, and you've had a problem with that from 2020 onwards, then you need to fix it this year, because if you don't, then your business is at a very real risk. Okay. The other things that we've seen this year, so tariffs. I don't think that I would have been able to do this episode in all good conscience without having a nod to the new US president and his feelings on tariffs. Now, in the run up to these being announced, I sent out a message to my C-suite community, and on the day that the tariffs were finalised, I sent out another message, because tariffs as a service-based business are not problematic for you. They may be problematic for some of the companies that you want to target, specifically companies who rely on import or export to the US. And that will be changeable over the coming months. I actually asked my CFO about this because he is infinitely more qualified to make financial prediction decisions than me. And one of the discussions we had was around what the economical impact of it would be. There would be an initial massive downturn in the economy on the tariffs being announced. And he didn't feel that the new president would be happy about that, and that their ego would potentially lead them into making other decisions about tariffs later down the line. How long that goes, nobody knows. And also who can predict what that person is going to be doing? Also, if you're wondering as to why I'm referring to them as the new US president, nobody needs me. Nobody needs me to talk about that particular person's name. So I'm not going to. But needless to say, tariffs, if you are selling to corporates, even if you're selling to corporates in the US, if you're service-based, it is not going to be relevant to you, or those tariffs are not going to be relevant to you, and they're not going to stop companies working with you either. All right. So just in case that was a fear on your mind, please don't worry about it. In terms of how you talk to companies that you might want to work with or might be working with that are going to be impacted by the tariffs, ask them about it. People shy away from difficult topics and communicating about difficult topics. And actually what you should be doing is saying, how is this going to impact you? Because realistically, you need to know in order to support them better, but you also need to know so that you can predict how your business is going to do. Okay. And then we looked at some other things. So I say me and Max looked at some other interesting data around what's going to happen with companies in 2025. Essentially, there are a few areas of massive growth. This doesn't mean, so when I give you this list, it doesn't mean it's exhaustive. It also doesn't mean that anything not mentioned on this list is going to go to the dogs and that they're never going to, use other areas ever again. It just means that there are certain growth areas in 2025, particularly from that external consultancy perspective. So things like strategy work is going to have a bigger rise this year. We're also going to see a rise in companies taking on consultants in the AI space and other technologies. So AI, cybersecurity, that kind of thing. Because again, these companies have huge opportunity and power at the moment, and other organizations, even that aren't involved in the tech space or operating in that tech space, are going through major periods of digital transformation. Pretty much every single industry, from education through to social housing, through to healthcare, public and private, and all other private sector industries are going through periods of digital transformation. So AI and cybersecurity is going to be big. We're also going to see growth in ESG and climate. So companies are super focused on making sure that they are doing the right things, and that they need to be aware of regulations, that they need to be compliant with new regulations, particularly around ESG and climate. So if you're working in those spaces, it's going to be important. If you're working with companies who operate in those spaces, they're going to have more money, more funding, and, potentially a more positive time in 2025. And then finally, one of the points I wanted to pick up on was in 2024, we heard a lot from companies who said that they were shelving projects. One of the interesting things that I notice about working with sales teams, professional sales teams inside organizations, and working with entrepreneurs is the way that we approach things differently. Okay. So one of the common themes of 2024 was that companies would say, we're shelving projects. We're putting a pause on projects. We're hitting pause on that project. We are not allocating budget to these areas. We don't have budget. And professional salespeople weren't bothered, because they were like, that's just going to be a brush off, or it's just going to be temporary. And we'll use our business development strategies and techniques to keep in touch. We'll use our sales skills to explore and identify other opportunities. We will use our sales skills to support organizations we're already working with to see where we can maximize revenue with a small number of clients. They weren't worried. Entrepreneurs, however, who are not experienced salespeople with corporates, were listening to these things and spiraling and actually sabotaging other deals, because they were going, okay, well, they don't have budget. Oh gosh, I should lower my prices for the next one. Oh gosh, now I've lowered my prices and they still don't want it. Oh gosh, it must be my offer. Oh gosh, companies aren't buying. And it was like this doom spiral, okay, where people were losing what they thought was a sure thing in business, and then they were applying that to everything else on the table and lowering their prices, diminishing their confidence, not, looking for other opportunities, not maximizing things. Difficult. And one of the, I think, best bits of advice I gave in the C-suite last year was every stakeholder you deal with will have an objection. Objections are a good thing, actually. They're a really good buying indicator. If you haven't listened to the episode on buying indicators yet, give it a listen. You'll understand why. But also, a lot of objections aren't real, right? They're actually questioning, or they're looking for reassurance, or they're trying to identify for themselves whether a problem is worth solving now or needs to be solved later, or whether there's something more urgent or problematic that's come up. And so if we just listen to objections all the time at face value, and especially the easy one of we don't have budget right now, you are diminishing the role that you have to go and make impact with any organization. And you are not going to make as many sales as you could. This doesn't mean go and be an absolute toe rag about objection handling. And, when a decision maker in an organization says they don't have budget, just going, well, obviously you do, because 98% of budget objections are real. And yeah, that is a stat. But it does mean that you need to think about your sales skills and techniques, and what you're using and what you're hearing and what you're actually doing to support prospective corporate clients to identify as other more urgent opportunities or necessary opportunities. Okay. So all in this to say that the insights are, from my perspective, relatively clear. Okay. And I think I'm conscious, and I have been conscious before recording this episode, that I didn't want it to sound like a biased overview of, yeah, everyone should be selling to corporates. But the data is super clear. Everyone should be selling to corporates. The evidence is also super clear that there is money to be made selling to corporates. The evidence is also super clear that, it doesn't have to take ages. It doesn't have to be painful. It doesn't mean that you are never going to be able to build a B2C business alongside it. However, I am going to say, and this is the biased bit, the reason that most entrepreneurs are not successfully selling to corporates is because they're not very good at sales, specifically B2B sales. And I'm watching a lot of people. So if you feel called out, I apologize, or not really, because I think it's useful for you. I love to be called out personally. My husband does it all the time. He's like, you can't drive very well. That's the constant refrain. But on a serious note, most entrepreneurs are not very good at B2B sales. I'm watching a lot of people who for the last 5 years have coasted on their sales strategy, right? And what I mean by coasted is they've said, oh yeah, it's fine. I just get loads of referrals. I'm like, great. Where's your controllable pipeline? Oh, I don't have one, but it's fine. I'll work on that later. At the moment, I get so many referrals. I just don't need to build a pipeline. I'm hearing people who say, oh yeah, but Jess, you just don't understand. Like I need to get my offer out first and figure out my pricing. And once I've done that, like, then I'm going to work on my sales strategy. But until I've done that, I can't. I hear people who say, oh yeah, well, it's fine. Like I'm going to set up like a webinar for corporates to come to. And then after that, it'll be fine because I feel okay doing sales conversations. And when I question conversion rates, metrics, number of leads generated, the numbers get lower and lower and lower. And that's a problem. All right. I often say on this podcast, like, I don't care, if you buy from me, if you don't buy from me, if you find somebody else you jive with better, as long as what you do works, I don't mind. But I'm not hearing that, right? The messages that I'm getting into my inbox are not, Jess, my business is so successful that I don't need your podcast episodes or your newsletters or your courses. Thanks very much, you're cool, but like my business is absolutely rocket fuel right now. I'm a multi-bazillionaire and I'm buying a yacht. Those are not the messages that I get. The messages that I get are, Jess, I wish that I'd worked with you 6 months ago because now my business feels really painful and I don't know what to do and I don't feel like I can invest in anything and I'm really scared. Those are the messages that I get. And that's heartbreaking. It's not to say don't send me those messages, but it is to say that this year is going to be pivotal for business owners. And if you don't invest in your sales strategy, again, doesn't have to be with me, it can be with whoever you like. But if you don't invest time, money, and energy because you're telling yourself that you don't have the time right now because you're too busy with delivery and you'll do it later, or you're telling yourself that you're not going to invest right now because you don't have the money right now because you're really focusing on B2C and you'll just prioritize this later, or it feels too scary, or whatever, it's going to be a real problem. And actually, if you're already feeling that way, I would suggest it already is a very real problem in your business. So, I appreciate that it sounds like a biased thing to say, but if you're not spending your business time, your business energy, your best energy, not the energy you spent after a full day delivering to a corporate, and you've got basically no brain cells left, which is how I feel some days of the week. And if you're not spending your business revenue on sales strategy, sales training, consultative sales skills, you are going to struggle this year. Okay. Even if you are telling me that you've, got loads of money on referrals and, whatever, because proactive sales pipelines this year are going to be integral. You are not going to be able to forecast your revenue without them. You are not going to be able to feel relaxed without them. You are certainly not going to have the business that you built on freedom and flexible working policies without them. You must learn how to build a strategic, stable sales pipeline for 2025. Because otherwise, you will just say, oh, well, the data says that I can, that companies are hiring, so I'm just going to figure it out. And then by the time you've spent trying to figure it out and not, you're going to realize that actually your revenue is further behind than you want it to be. And that's going to feel even more scary. And that's going to mean that it's even harder for you to take the time and the energy and the potentially investment and spend that on learning consultative sales skills that work. All right. So again, it doesn't have to be me you learn from. I don't care if there's somebody else that you drive with better, or if there's somebody else that you think is more appropriate for you, but you must focus your energy on sales skills and stable B2B sales pipeline that will see you into 2026. And after that, build up an amazing B2C business. Prove me wrong, like get some funnels, have a great time. Do all of those amazing things. but the choice is here now, and the choice very much is hamster wheel, continuous content creation, unpredictable sales pipeline, low ticket income, potentially in non-exciting areas for you if you're selling to consumers, or develop your sales skills, create a stable B2B sales pipeline that will carry you through into 2026, that will give you that additional cash that you can then invest however you want to build your business moving forward. All right. But stable sales pipeline, consultative sales skills, those are going to be the sexy things for 2025. Those are going to be the things that see you forward into 2026. And if you are interested, I am going to be launching a new live experience. I'm not going to talk about it on this episode. I think we've gone on enough for now. But if you are interested in hearing more about a new live experience that I'm going to be running, then keep your eyes peeled on newsletters towards the end of April. And also, if you want the early bird knowledge of what it is, then please feel free to drop me an email, jessica@jessicalorimer.com, and we will make sure that you're signed up to hear about it before anybody else. All right. But yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed that episode. Like I say, a bit of a different one than usual. If you have enjoyed it or you think it was really useful, please do forward it on to a friend, peer, colleague, anybody that you think would benefit from understanding what the sales market's going to look like in 2025 and what they might need to do. And I will see you in a couple of weeks for a return to normal programming and some lovely episodes from case study participants, and some lovely how to sell things in 2025. I'll see you soon.